Super Meat Boy is one of the most influential indie games of all time. And secondarily, I guess it's also one of the hardest games of all time. So, to flex my gaming superiority, as usual, in today's video I will be answering the age-old question. Is it possible to beat Super Meat Boy? Wait a minute, I'm a challenge YouTuber? When did this happen? Here's the thing, not only is this game already a challenge on its own, but it's also a pretty mechanically simple game, which only makes things harder for us. I know that beating games without jumping is generally my go-to, but with this game being a hardcore precision platformer, with jumping as its one and pretty much only mechanic, what would it even mean to try and play it without the jump button? Well, as we'll soon see, it makes the game very, very interesting. We start off in the forest, and we're immediately looking a little bit rough. Without the jump button, the only things we can even do are sprint and run back and forth, neither of which are too terribly productive when it comes to gaining height. Luckily, however, we don't have to worry about this too much, for you can actually play these levels in any order that you want, and you only have to complete 17 of the 20 levels in order to unlock the boss and move on. So although the first level here might have a little too much verticality for us right now, all we gotta do is sift through these other levels and hopefully find a little bit more luck. Alright, second level's worse. Third level's better. Still not great. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, no, probably not this one either. Or this one. Oh, look, I'm getting some height here. You know, some high ground, that's good. At least I can die on this one. Yo, is that audibletrial.com/sample a fast and free way to not only get access to a ton of great audiobooks, but also support me at the same time? Yes, sign me up. No! Wait, hold on. Got that block out of the way? Now check this out. There we go, that's progress, baby. Yeah, that's it for that one. You know, I'll just go out on a limb here. Alright, you get the point. We don't have anywhere near the amount of resources we need to do literally any of the levels here, let alone 17. So at this point, we really only have two options to get those additional resources that we need. One could be to try this challenge off of an already completed file, so we could use an unlockable character like Nija here to gain height and complete levels without having to use the jump button. The issue with this avenue, however, is that every boss fight and the entirety of the final world requires you to play as Meat Boy, who, as we've seen, probably doesn't have what it takes to cover those levels on his own. So it looks like we'll have to give Meat Boy himself some new options via the second avenue, which might be a bit more sinister. Okay, so I know it looks like I just made a jump cut from the beginning to the end of the level, which would obviously be against the rules of the challenge, but I promise you that's not the case. Take a look at this replay and the unaffected timer up in the corner. As you can hopefully see, this apparent teleportation of Meat Boy is actually entirely possible in-game, through the use of what I like to call the time stop glitch. By pressing and holding the Alt key on a keyboard, or in my case, clicking on the game's tab in window mode, the game will appear to completely freeze up. Although it looks like nothing is happening, during this time, the game is actually doing a bunch of calculations in the background to try and determine where Meat Boy will be after the game unfreezes. For example, if you jump... Geez. Anyway, if you stop and resume time while midair, the game will take note of the fact that Meat Boy is airborne and use it to determine how far down he would have fallen had time not been stopped. This also works when moving horizontally. When stopping time, the game will calculate Meat Boy's change in horizontal position by taking the direction being pressed, whether or not the sprint button is being pressed, and how long time was stopped for, and putting them all in one big equation. This effectively allows us to kinda move around even though time itself isn't moving, which, as we've already seen, can have some weird effects. Obviously, you usually can't just run across thin air, but the game doesn't consider this when time is stopped. Since we start off on flat ground, the game doesn't even think about changing our vertical position, and instead just focuses on moving us horizontally, in this case across an entire gap. It gets even weirder though. Check out this level. Oh yeah, not only were we able to run across this gap while time was stopped, but we were also able to completely pass through these walls and saws. Again, the game isn't looking at the level at all when time is stopped. All it knows is that we were running to the right for a certain amount of time, and it just assumes that we were allowed to do that. This is clearly an incredibly powerful trick to have in our arsenal, as it allows us to completely cheese through many of these 4 levels. we can do 4 levels. Despite the time stop glitch's clear utility, it still doesn't solve our problem of gaining any height, as we can't really trick the game into calculating a position higher than our starting position. This means that we can really only complete levels in which Bandage Girl here is either at the same height or lower than Meat Boy, which is 4 levels. Obviously, 4 is a significantly smaller number than 17, and although I did also do a few of the Dark World levels, which are unlocked after completing the normal ones, they don't count towards our level completion goal. So here we are, yet again, scrambling around this world, hoping to find anything we can work with no hope to be found. Sure, we could turn this into a minimalist challenge and try and count how many jumps we'll need for each level, but even that seems pretty daunting at this point. We're gonna need another breakthrough, and I think I might just have the exact right thing. Okay, let me explain. Although it definitely looks like I'm just straight up jumping here, I'm actually not even touching the keyboard at all. These jumps are just passively happening, courtesy of the auto jump glitch. This glitch is activated by holding down the jump button, pausing, letting go of the jump button, and then unpausing. Doing this incredibly simple string of actions for some reason confuses the game so much, causing a jump input to occur on every single frame, making Meat Boy bounce all over the goddamn place. Now obviously this breaks the rules of the challenge in at least some capacity, as I am just straight up jumping. But since activating the glitch only requires a single use of the jump button, I'll just be minimizing how many times I use the glitch. In this sense, don't think of this as a minimum jump challenge, but rather a minimum jump button challenge. So with this new trick, things still aren't looking too good, to be frank. Even though the auto jump glitch is a pretty cool thing to have, it isn't preserved in between levels, meaning the best we'd be able to do at this point is complete 13 other levels in this world with 1 button press each before unlocking the boss, at which point we'll just keep having to use more and more of the jump button throughout worlds that are only gonna get harder and more complex as we go on. So you know what? Screw this challenge. If we're already willing to walk through goddamn walls and farm infinite jumps in what is supposed to be a no jumping run, then let's just toss all our inhibitions out the window and see how much we can truly bend this game to our will. If you're gonna give me an impossible challenge, then I'm gonna give you an impossible solution. And it all starts with yet another insane glitch, Bandage Duplication. Strap in for this one, it'll be pretty easy to get lost here. Okay, so bandages are collectibles that can be found in a select few levels that usually just unlock other characters. And although farming infinite bandages to do so could certainly be useful, the actual reason I want to duplicate bandages will become apparent after I actually explain how we're going to go about doing it. The first step is finding what's called a warp zone, which are trios of bonus levels that can be found in some of the normal levels. Each world has 4 warp zones, and we have to choose one as our candidate to do the glitch in. A good candidate would be a warp zone that is accessible, completable, and has a bandage that I can collect over and over without having to jump too much. Immediately we can rule out this one, as red warp zones are just for unlocking garbage characters like this guy and don't even have any bandages in them. Every other warp zone though has exactly 2 bandages, and are therefore at least viable candidates for the glitch. This guy though is looking a little sus, and that's because he's actually a dark world warp zone. Like I mentioned a little earlier in the video, dark levels are unlocked by completing their normal level counterparts, so accessing this guy would require using 1 jump press to complete the normal version of the level and then another to actually enter the warp zone. This immediately makes him an inferior option to the 2 normal warp zones, as these guys both only require 1 jump press to reach. So now that we've narrowed down our options to 2 equally accessible warp zones, let's look at the 3 levels they are comprised of in order to determine which one is best for our purposes. Although the first warp zone initially appears fairly promising, as all 3 levels are actually completable without jumping, the same cannot be said about either of the available bandages. In the second warp zone, on the other hand, although only 2 of the 3 levels are possible jumpless, the bandage in the second level is extremely accessible through the use of the time stop glitch. This makes this warp zone an overall better candidate, as 1 jumpless bandage is more valuable than 1 jumpless level, since we're going to be collecting the bandage multiple times. So with our ideal warp zone chosen, let's restart the file and start getting to work. Immediately we ignore every single level and beeline it to level 19, in which we first pass through some walls with the time stop glitch before using 1 jump press to get the height needed to enter this secret area with the warp zone. We run through the first level like it's nothing, before then getting to the bandage that we gotta start duplicating. First, we just gotta collect the bandage and complete the level normally, or as normally as we're used to anyway. From there, we activate yet another godforsaken glitch, the warp zone replay. Okay, I'll make this one quick. Usually when you complete a level, a little animation of Bandage Girl getting kidnapped plays out and a replay of all your attempts at that level begins. However, there's a built-in functionality that allows you to skip the Bandage Girl animation and immediately view the replay by pressing either the jump button or the pause button. Warp zones, on the other hand, aren't supposed to have replays at all. But the functionality that allows you to skip to the replay still exists for whatever reason, allowing you to force your way into an otherwise unviewable replay by simply pressing the pause button once you complete the level. From here, we have the option to play through this level again, and since this isn't supposed to be possible in Warp Zone levels, collecting the bandage again in our second run through tricks the game into thinking we've collected 2 bandages in this single level. Hence, bandage duplication. Finally. But we only have to do this once, before then using another jump press to make it through this last level, collecting a 3rd bandage on our way out for good measure. And there we go, we pulled off bandage duplication with only 2 uses of the jump button. That's not too bad. But what did that actually do? Well, although it may not look like anything terrible is happening, know that behind the scenes, us collecting that single extra bandage is currently ruining the game. And in order to understand why, allow me to introduce you to this guy. Bear with me on this one. This guy's name is George. Everyone say hi to George. He's the one responsible for keeping track of how many bandages you've collected in a warp zone. He's initially just chilling in his cubicle at a certain memory address, which indicates that neither bandage has been collected from this warp zone yet. However, as soon as we collected that first one, George moved the memory addresses up a little bit. This is so that, if the warp zone is completed, he can remind himself of which bandages were collected so that he can save them to the overall counter. Once we collected our second bandage then, he again incremented the memory address, business as usual. But then, we collected a 3rd bandage. Warp zones are only ever supposed to have 2 bandages in them, and there is no exception. George doesn't know this though, look at him, you think he's paying attention? Instead, he just does what he always does and pulls up yet another memory address, even though this one's not supposed to be accessible, and has nothing to do with bandages. Then we completed the warp zone, and once we did, George placed a big ol' -1 next to the 2 memory addresses that contained bandage data in order to indicate that they had been collected. Nah, yeah, but see, now he realizes his mistake. He knows there isn't supposed to be another memory address here, but what do you expect him to be able to do about it? He's just a bandage counter. Dealing with this is way beyond his pay grade. So he does the only thing he knows how to do and places another -1 here, just like the others, and hopes that it'll just happen to work itself out in the end. It does not. Turns out the memory address that George just put a fat -1 next to had nothing to do with bandages, and instead determines the current chapter that Meat Boy is in. Yeah, we're in chapter -1 now. George, buddy, what does that even mean? Naturally, Clyde from the chapter data department has absolutely no clue what's going on, cause he just got the memo that we're supposedly in chapter -1, which isn't a real thing. He's currently working with a memory address that stores chapter 1 data, so with no better ideas, he just scrolls through memory addresses until he finds where chapter -1 data would be stored if it even existed. Meanwhile, on our end, we go ahead and enter level 111, and beat it through the use of yet another jump press. Much like George, since it's Clyde's job to keep track of chapter data, he goes ahead and increments the value at what he thinks is the chapter -1 address to indicate that a level had been completed. But that's when Beatrice shows up and is all like, bro, Clyde, what in the world are you doing at my address? I've only been gone for like 5 minutes. And Clyde's just like, your address? I thought this is where chapter -1 data is stored. And Beatrice is like, dude, chapter -1 doesn't even exist, you idiot. What are you talking about? This address is supposed to determine the level type that Meat Boy is in. See, now Clyde's also freaking out, because he doesn't even know what he just did. So he's just like, oh, okay, so like hypothetically then, what would happen if I, say, incremented this level type by 1? And Beatrice is like, nah, that'd be bad news, because any value of 1 or above would indicate that Meat Boy is in a warp zone level. Yeah, bad news indeed, Beatrice, because now we're back over to freaking George, who's looking in horror at the memo saying that level 111 here is a warp zone level, which he knows isn't the case. But in a panicked attempt to try and right his wrongs from earlier, he again just tries to improvise with what he's got by going back to his starting address and treating this level as if it's a warp zone. We go ahead and spend 3 more jump presses to repeatedly replay this level, collecting the bandage every time, again triggering bandage duplication. The bandage isn't disappearing like it's supposed to, because George over here, like the failure he is, isn't counting the bandages as we're collecting them, but is instead just continuing to pull up more memory addresses from the void as if we're in a warp zone, including this little problematic guy from earlier. Once we exit though, he doesn't put -1s on all the addresses like he did last time. This is because we got to the map by exiting the level, so the bandages we collected aren't actually going to be counted because that's how warp zones work. And someone decided that we're going by warp zone rule. It was actually Clyde. He accidentally did that by changing the level type, if you remember. Anyway, rather than putting a -1 on all the bandages to indicate that they've been collected, George instead puts the number corresponding to the level ID of each bandage not collected, which is usually so he can remind himself of which levels still have bandages that have yet to be collected. So, since we were in level 11 for all 3 bandages, he puts a fat 10 on all the addresses, including the one that determines our current chapter. So you know what that means. Clyde gets another memo, and there's no way he's happy about it, because chapter 10, much like chapter -1, shouldn't actually exist. But he sucks it up and scrolls on down to where chapter 10 data would be stored if it was real, before coming across something peculiar. There's already some data there. He looks over at Beatrice, but this address is way out of her jurisdiction. She's just as clueless as everyone else at this point. Clyde then doesn't really know what to think of this, so he interprets this 1 as a little bit of chapter 10 somehow already being done. Namely, this bit represents the chapter's glitch level being unlocked. Glitch levels are kind of just like warp zones, but they're usually only available after completing the entire chapter. Thanks to Clyde's misinterpretation though, we can waltz on over to the wrongly unlocked level, use another jump press, and complete the glitch level way earlier than we're supposed to. Clyde watches this all happen, and like he usually does, he turns over to the address that stores chapter data and prepares to flip the bit that would indicate that the chapter 10 glitch level had just been completed. However, he hesitates. For the past couple minutes, everything has seemed like chaos, and it seems like that chaos is sourced from actions just like this one. Changing data and memory addresses whose purpose he doesn't actually know. He's just assuming that this is where chapter 10 data is stored, just like he assumed the level type address was where chapter -1 data was stored, and just like George assumed that the current chapter address was where Warp Zone Bandage 3 was stored. Clyde knows this is a bad assumption though. After all, there was some inexplicable data already in there, which doesn't make any sense if this actually was a chapter 10 data address. Heck, chapter 10 still doesn't even exist, so why would there even be a memory address for it at all? But alas, he's got no better ideas. With very little faith in himself, he flips the bit. So then, what was that address? Why was there data in it, and what did Clyde's little change just do? Well, to answer all three of those questions, the address he mistook for chapter 10 data actually stored data for unlocked chapters. There was a 1 already in there because we obviously have chapter 1 unlocked, and from that you might be able to guess what Clyde's little change ended up doing. Folks, this is the Super Meat Boy Wrong Warp, the weirdest and most complex glitch I've ever had the luxury of researching and explaining. And although it did take a few jumps here and there to set up, skipping over 4 entire chapters seems well worth the effort to me. It might be possible to reduce the number of jumps used in chapter -1 here, but I seriously tried as many things as I could think of, and nothing yielded any worthwhile results. But that's fine by me, cause now we're in the end, with only 5 required levels in the way of us reaching the end of our journey. Yeah, this level's pretty rough though. And although I did find out that you can travel up a single tile at a time by extremely precisely using the time stop glitch, it didn't end up saving this level from adding to our counter. The second level, on the other hand, oh yeah, we're in there. Level 3 though is just a tad bit more complicated. These moving platforms move even while time is stopped, meaning they aren't safe to stand on while teleporting. So making it all the way across this level took a lot more precision than you may expect. That being said though, it is still miraculously possible jumpless. Yeah, this one isn't though, not much I can do here. And despite how it may initially seem, this next level is also unfortunately impossible. Although Bandage Girl is below Meat Boy's starting position, which is historically the one condition to make a level possible jumpless, she's actually too far away to reach her with the time stop glitch. For longer levels like this, you can't just hold the glitch for as long as you want to teleport across the entire thing. For at some point, Meat Boy's intended next position once time is resumed will be completely off screen, and if you go off screen in this game, you die. This means that I had to use another jump press to get more initial height before canceling the auto jump glitch to do some teleports. It's worth noting that canceling this glitch requires pressing the jump button again, but it doesn't add to the overall counter so long as I continue holding the jump button until the next time I have to activate the auto jump glitch again, since it only requires holding and releasing the jump button. So yeah, it's a half button press. There you go, I said the line, you happy now? Anyway, as I just implied, canceling the glitch in this level isn't a problem, because I can just use that same button press to activate the auto jump glitch in the boss, finally defeating this guy. And with that, we only have one more final stretch before we make it to the end of our long, perilous journey. And although the trigger for the ending cutscene here is a little above Meat Boy's spawning position, which would usually discourage me from trying it jumpless, we might be able to use a little trick we discovered earlier to help us out a bit. See, we could use the time stop glitch to teleport to this platform here, but we can actually do better by repeatedly running into this rubble to our right. It might not look like it, but since the time stop glitch can allow us to travel up one block at a time, we can actually treat the rock layout out over here as a bit of a staircase. And sure enough, with enough steps climbed, we can use this initial height to teleport all the way over here, with a significant height increase from where we were without this climb. This gives us way more options regarding how we approach the end of the level, which, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is just a big box this time. I need to be close enough to the box to be able to teleport into it, but I also need ground to stand on in order to actually do the glitch. Since getting the height needed to reach this upper area seems unfeasible, given that this potential staircase is nowhere near as useful as the first, the most promising area here seemed to be this little bit of ground here. But as I soon found in my attempts to get there, it wasn't quite enough. Now here you might be thinking, yeah, obviously it didn't work, you missed the end of the level by a mile. But the endgame trigger actually does extend all the way out to here. Instead, the issue is that I'm a single tile too low to activate the trigger, which is obviously a problem. This means that we need to find some ground to stand on in this final area that is at least one block taller than all of these platforms. But in that same sense, we can't get enough height to access the platforms that are all the way up here. And as I'm sure you've noticed, this doesn't leave us with many options. But there is in fact one bit of ground here that might just fit all of the criteria we're looking for. This thing. A tiny, tiny hole in the wall. As I found out over in this area, it is actually possible to stand in these types of holes in the wall so long as I can teleport into them. And conveniently, there just so happens to be a random platform all the way over here that lies at the exact same height as the hole. All we needed to do at this point was get to that platform and pray that the gap is small enough to teleport all the way over. No matter how many times I tried though, I just couldn't make it. I would either stop time for too long and die off screen, or not hold it long enough to make it all the way in the wall. It seemed so precise that I actually decided to pull out the task tools to pull some of the weight for me. And by task tools, I mean I used an auto hotkey script like a caveman. But with this, I was able to tweak how long I would stop time every time I went for the trick. I kept changing it and then testing it and changing it and testing it until I finally honed in on what might just be the perfect in-between value. This isn't what actually happened. Turns out, the gap really is just one tile too large to cross, even if you do go as far as the time stop glitch allows. And as far as I could tell, there's no other way to clip into this wall and land on this platform. There are so many things here that if changed just the tiniest bit would make this last hurdle possible, but alas, that's just not the case. In a lot of my other videos, things can end up turning out so perfectly that it almost feels like the challenge was meant to be possible. But it's situations like this that remind us that, no, this isn't how the game was designed to be played at all. But even if we didn't get that cinematic ending that we feel like we might deserve, the fact that we've even made it here with so few jumps goes to show that even when playing in the most broken and absurd way possible, we can still make the run our own. And at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. Hey, welcome to the end of the video. If you liked this video, you can go ahead and do all the YouTube things to let me know about it. If you want to see more videos from me, you could probably subscribe. I assume that helps you find videos when I make them. I don't actually know, but it can't hurt to try it. Audible is also in the description if you want to support me. It's a free way to do that, and you get the entire library of audiobooks. It's pretty sick. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say, so see ya.